Sometimes people ask me, how can we, as finite, tiny, limited human beings with our teensy little brains, begin to presume to know the first thing about God? If God really exists, how can we claim to know anything about God? How can we know about God's character, his nature, his will, his purpose, his plans? We can't claim to know any of that stuff because we're these tiny little finite human beings. We can't even begin to guess or speculate what God might be like, or what his plans might be, or what his purposes might be. And so the argument goes. But I beg to differ. I think as human beings we can know about God. And not only know a little bit, we can know a lot. We can understand things about even the deepest heart and thoughts and priorities of God. And I want to suggest a way that we could know those things. In fact, not just one way, but I want to look at 3 ways. Reflection. So reflection is about thinking inwardly, thinking about your experience, thinking about your understanding and beliefs. Reason is about logically working through things, asking questions, exploring, using our mind, our cognitive faculties to understand more about the world and about its creator. And thirdly, revelation. And I want to explore each of these things and unpack them and then give you an example at the end. So please try and stick with me. I'm going somewhere and there's some important stuff to get from this. So starting with reflection, self-reflection, thinking inwardly about yourself. It's been argued, and I think this is true, that deep down we all believe that God exists. This belief is kind of innate. An amazing Christian philosopher called Alvin Plantinga has argued that belief in God just forms naturally when our mind is functioning as it should function in the way that we were designed to. We naturally form a belief that God exists. He argues that this belief is properly basic. It's not inferred or figured out from anything. It's just there in us. It's sometimes being called the sense of the divine. People just have a sense that God exists, even without argument, evidence, without reading the Bible, without listening to anyone else talking about God. It's just kind of there in our hearts. The Bible says that God has set eternity in our hearts, and perhaps this is a hint at what it means. God is eternity. He's the Alpha and Omega, and maybe there's a little bit of us that kind of knows God exists. Now, to me, this seems like a really plausible idea when you give the fact that we're created in God's image. If that's actually true, if we are genuinely created in God's image, then it seems to me that everyone will have this little bit of belief in God. Now, this isn't a knockdown argument or a proof that God exists. It's just an appeal to a general human experience, a kind of sense or an intuition that just seems deeply set in our hearts that, yep, there is actually a God out there. And we were designed for a purpose and for a reason. Okay, so as I say, it's not a knockdown argument. People could give arguments against this idea, but I think there's something in this, in our own reflection and our own experience. The second one I referred to was reason. Now, God is the epitome of reason. God is a rational being. He is reason. It says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. That word for word is the same word from which we derive the word logic, logos. The word logos or logic are kind of linked in their origin, in their history. And to me, the idea is that God is this rational, reasonable being. We see in other places like Proverbs, it proclaims that God created the universe out of wisdom and understanding. So it seems like rationality and wisdom and understanding are innately part of God. And it seems it's very much an essential part of what it is to be human beings as well. We reason in ways that other members of our world don't reason. Other animals, other organisms seem to lack this capacity to reason in the way that we reason. And maybe that's part of us being made in God's image again. But that reason itself can lead us into relationship with God. You see that Jesus and Paul and many of the great inspirational biblical leaders use reason and questions and logic to lead people to theological truths, to lead people to ideas that were significant and life-changing and profound. So we've talked about reflection, that kind of deep innate belief in God. Just reflect on it and you know God's there. The second one is reason. Ask questions, explore, figure out the world and it'll lead you in the right direction. Now, that doesn't mean that reason always works. I think sometimes reason can lead us off the trail a little bit, so we can't rely on these things alone. But the third one, and this is really profound, revelation. The word revelation means to make something known that was previously unknown, to reveal something, to make it apparent or known. how can we know about the deepest heart of God? How can we know about God's cares, his compassion, his will, his concerns? We can know about them if God makes those things known, if we enter into relationship with him, if God chooses to disclose and to reveal and to show us these things. Then we can claim to know them. And God reveals himself in different ways. So there's a kind of general revelation in the world. There's a sort of like general sense of God's existence when we look at the created world around us. So theologians sometimes call that the general revelation. But there's also special revelations where God interacts and intervenes with the world at particular points and particular times for particular reasons to show us something and to teach us something. And the Bible is full of specific revelations like that. People who walk with God, experienced miracles, saw God changing lives, changing nations, directing people, interacting with the world. Jesus himself was the ultimate revelation. Jesus put it this way. He said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Look at me and you want to know what God's like? This is where you look, because if you've seen me, you have seen the Father. Revelation. We have such a direct revelation as Christians because God stepped into the world as a physical human being and made himself known through Jesus. So you've got this idea of revelation. But even in the church afterwards, in Acts, as we read about the story of the church, and when we look around at the church in the world today, when you talk to your friends, maybe even reflecting on the experiences in your own life, revelation may be there too. It may be that God has spoken to you prophetically through people. Maybe you've seen miracles through your church. Maybe you've seen answered to prayer. All of these things are examples of God revealing himself, revealing his goodness, revealing his love, revealing his care, revealing his will in the world today. So revelation is this really cool thing. And revelation can be through the Bible, through the scriptures, and it can also be through our experience today of our relationship with God, walking with God on a day-to-day basis. Revelation, making something known that was previously unknown. So I want to share a story of some people who experienced revelation. They experienced a revelation of Christ. And it was these wise men who were drawn to Jesus. When Jesus was born, the incarnation event, that profound point in history where God took on human flesh. These wise men had been watching the stars and they've been seeking for signs, and somewhere within their culture, their history, their expectations, they knew that God was going to do something, and they discerned that this particular star was a sign, and they went on a really immensely long journey. Scholars often believe that these wise men were somewhere originated in the Far East. So we're talking maybe China or Korea, well over that way. And they travelled all the way through Central Asia to Israel. Now, I don't know the arguments for and against this, so I'm not going to kind of teach it as a solid fact, but it sounds like this kind of scholarly community believed these guys went on a really long journey in pursuit of the truth. But what's really profound and really startling is these guys were not Jewish. They were not part of any kind of Judeo-cultural, they have no heritage in common, no history in common. Yet through whatever experience had been handed down to them, through whatever traditions, through gazing at the stars, which we call astrology today, they managed to discern a work of God. Revelation. God had revealed something to them in their time and place. So some people will say, well, what happens to people who were born outside of any kind of Christianity, any preaching of the gospel, no Bibles, no churches? Well, I think these guys give us a clue. God reached them in other ways. God revealed himself in other ways. God, in fact, gave them enough revelation to cause them to undertake this huge journey which converged on Jesus. He was the goal, he was a purpose, he was the point that journey was going towards. And when they saw him, they realised that God's Messiah was there as a baby in front of them, God incarnate. So I find that amazing. But what's really cool as well is God didn't just reveal himself to these wise men who went following the star to Jesus's birthplace. He also revealed himself to shepherds. You've got this whole spectrum of society. You've got these wise men who are presumably very rich based on their gifts and their wisdom and the journey they'd undertaken. So they had some wealth behind them. And then you've got these shepherds, this kind of humble, working class farming community who are just very, I presume it would be like the equivalent of minimum wage or below in the culture, but the angels have revealed to them that the Messiah is going to be born and come and join in the celebration. So you've got this whole section of society, near and far, rich and poor, like everyone is just called in and they all converge and they all get their journey centered on Jesus, the hope, the message of God, the revelation of God. So I want to today say that revelation can come in many ways. It can surprise us, it can be unseen, but we can also be looking for it. And I want to also encourage us that you've got these three different ways that God is making himself known in the world. The reflecting on the belief that's just there in our hearts. You've got the process of reasoning, asking questions, exploring, understanding the world more deeply. It's a created world, and I think when you really ask questions and look at the evidence objectively, it leads to Christ. And then the third way, through revelation, being open in our hearts to God's revelation in our lives here and now, and celebrating the revelation that we're given through the Bible and through the church and in other people's lives too. So I'm going to leave it there today. I've obviously packed a load into this one, but it's just been an idea that's kind of stirred up and I wanted to share it today. So God bless you. Have an amazing day. Take care, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.